They say every neighborhood has that one person who thinks they run everything, the self-appointed ruler of lawns, fences, and mailbox heights. But in my neighborhood, her reign went much further. She didn't just enforce rules, she created them, twisted them, wielded them like weapons. And on one quiet Saturday morning, her obsession with control collided headfirst with the one thing she couldn't manipulate. Me. It began with a knock that split the stillness of dawn. 3 sharp raps, quick and deliberate, the kind that announce trouble long before a word is spoken. The kind of knock that makes your stomach tighten because somewhere deep down you already know who it is. I didn't even need to look. I could already picture her, perfect posture, sunglasses that hid her eyes but not her intent, that tight little smile that always seemed 1 second away from snapping. What I didn't know then, standing in my doorway with coffee in hand, was that this knock would unravel everything. That a simple refusal, just one no, would ignite the biggest storm this community had ever seen. What started as petty power play would grow into a war that would expose secrets, destroy reputations, and shatter the illusion of peace we all pretended to live under. It's strange how small things spiral, how a single morning can turn into a neighborhood spectacle, how whispers become investigations, and how the very people sworn to protect order can be the ones tearing it apart from the inside. But here's the thing about control. It only works until someone pushes back, and I pushed back. The irony? She thought calling the cops would end it. She thought she could humiliate me, force me to comply, and make an example out of me for everyone else. What she didn't realize was that the very police she called to her aid reported to me that morning didn't just change my standing with the HOA, it changed everything. Neighbors I thought were silent started speaking. Secrets buried under years of suburban politeness began to crack open. So the real question isn't what happened when she called the cops. It's what happened after, 'cause that knock, that was just the beginning. If you drove through Crestwood Estates on any given morning, you'd probably think it was the picture of peace. A quiet cul-de-sac lined with manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and 2-story homes that all looked like they'd been copied and pasted from the same glossy real estate brochure. The kind of neighborhood where everyone waved but few actually talked, where gossip traveled faster than mail, and where the sound of sprinklers in the early hours was the loudest thing you'd hear before noon. For most people, Crestwood was a dream. For me, it was home, though not in the way the HOA would have liked. My house sat at the end of the street, a little larger than the others. Built decades before, the community went full, planned perfection. It had personality, aged oak shutters, a wide front porch, and a driveway that curved like a lazy river before stopping right at the feet of my pride and joy, a 1967 Mustang. Midnight blue, perfectly restored, humming like a beast every time I turned the key. It was more than just a car, it was a legacy. My father and I rebuilt it together piece by piece, in the kind of way that makes you appreciate every detail, the smell of engine oil, the glint of chrome, the slow satisfaction of bringing something beautiful back to life. Weekends were sacred, Saturdays especially. I'd start my mornings with a cup of coffee and a soft classic rock playlist, the kind of ritual that felt like grounding in a world obsessed with schedules and HOA-approved aesthetics. I'd spend hours in my garage, tuning, polishing, making sure every inch of that Mustang gleamed. It wasn't just a hobby, it was therapy. The car was a connection to my late father, a reminder that discipline and care outlast everything. Even time, that peace, the hum of the engine, the golden sunlight stretching across the driveway, was what I lived for. But in Crestwood, peace was a fragile illusion, because across the street lived Mrs. Karen Whitmore, HOA president, enforcer of community harmony, a woman who believed that power was measured by how many fines you could issue before breakfast. She had this aura of permanent disapproval, like she could spot a violation from a mile away. Her yard was a masterpiece of symmetry, 2 trimmed hedges, a perfect circle of flowers, and a mailbox so polished it could reflect your sins. She wasn't alone, of course. The HOA board was her court of loyal followers, There was Dennis, the vice president, who treated every meeting like a military operation. He wore sunglasses indoors and had a whistle hanging from his neck as if the neighborhood was his personal boot camp. Then came Melinda, secretary and gossip hub, who knew everything about everyone. Her hobby was sending anonymous complaint emails that somehow always landed on Karen's desk. And rounding them out was Frank, the treasurer, a nervous, rule-obsessed accountant who measured his self-worth in spreadsheets. Together, they ruled Crestwood Estates with clipboards, passive-aggressive smiles, and a rule book thicker than the town's phone directory. For years, I'd stayed out of their way, paid my dues, mowed my lawn, kept the car polished but parked neatly in my driveway. We had an unspoken understanding. I didn't bother them, and they didn't bother me. Until one spring morning, a small crack formed in that silent treaty. It started innocently enough. Karen sent a friendly reminder notice taped to my mailbox. "Please ensure that your vehicle remains covered when parked outdoors," it read, in her signature cursive. I stared at it for a long moment, sipping my coffee. My Mustang had been sitting uncovered for less than an hour, sun glinting off its hood like a jewel. I didn't even have to think to know she was watching from behind her blinds. The letter ended with, "We appreciate your cooperation in maintaining neighborhood standards." That phrase, neighborhood standards, was her weapon of choice. It sounded polite, but underneath it was a veiled threat, a promise that if I didn't comply, there'd be consequences. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. A car cover wasn't going over my Mustang. That car wasn't meant to be hidden. The next few days I caught her watching. Once from her window, once during her morning walk, once when she happened to stop across the street, pretending to check her mailbox as her eyes lingered on my driveway. She'd always give a tight smile, one that never reached her eyes, and move on. Little things started piling up after that. A letter about lawn edging inconsistency. A note about unsanctioned modifications to my garage door because I'd replaced the handle myself. None of it made sense. I'd seen other homes with worse violations, broken mailboxes, overgrown weeds, paint chipping, but somehow mine became the focus. Still, I let it slide. I was used to egos. As police chief, I'd dealt with far worse than HOA politics. But something about the way Karen operated was different, calculated, personal, like she wanted a reaction. Then came the neighborhood picnic, Crestwood's annual display of forced togetherness. Everyone was expected to attend, smile, and pretend like everything was perfect under Karen's leadership. I showed up out of politeness, stayed near the back, and tried not to get pulled into conversations about trash schedules or driveway length regulations. But Karen found me, as she always did. "Chief," she said, voice honeyed but hollow, "I was just telling the board how your car really adds character to the neighborhood. It's quite vintage," I smiled politely. "That's one way to put it. Oh, don't get me wrong," she continued. "It's beautiful. Though, technically the HOA encourages uniformity. Some people might think it's a bit flashy." I met her eyes and smiled just enough to make her uncomfortable. "I'll take flashy over boring any day." Her smile didn't move, but her jaw tightened. That was the moment I knew she'd decided something. A week later, I got another letter. This time, it wasn't a reminder, it was a warning. Failure to comply with HOA policies may result in penalties. The reason listed: non-conforming aesthetic elements, vehicle display in visible area, vehicle display. Like my Mustang was a billboard instead of a car. I almost laughed, but something about the wording made me pause. It was too formal, too deliberate, like it had been written not just to scold, but to provoke. The following morning, as I was wiping down the hood of the Mustang, I noticed Karen across the street again. This time, she wasn't pretending to check her mail. She was recording. Her phone pointed directly at me, her posture stiff and self-righteous. When I raised an eyebrow, she smiled and waved, as if she was just documenting neighborhood compliance. The next day, another notice arrived. Unauthorized use of property for non-community purposes. That was when it clicked. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was building a case. Over the next few weeks, the tension thickened. HOA board members started dropping subtle comments during their walks. Frank mentioned that some residents were concerned about excessive engine noise. Melinda asked if I'd ever considered parking the car inside for safety reasons. Dennis stopped by once just to measure my mailbox post for a compliance check. It was clear they were circling. I told myself not to engage. I'd dealt with worse political games in City Hall, but every morning the unease grew heavier. There was something invasive about the way they watched, how my private life had become community property in their eyes. The Mustang, once a symbol of pride, began to feel like a target. Still, I tried to ignore it. I threw myself into work, long shifts at the department, community patrols, anything to keep my focus off the nonsense brewing at home. But every evening when I'd pull into the driveway, I could feel their eyes again. Behind curtains, behind smiles, waiting. Then, one afternoon, Karen stopped by in person. No letter this time, just her, standing on my porch with a clipboard and that same fixed smile. "Chief," she said, "we've been talking, and the board thinks it would be wonderful if you'd let us use your car for the upcoming community event. It would be perfect for the parade." Her tone was sugary sweet, but her eyes told another story. This wasn't a request, it was a test. I told her no. Politely, firmly, but still no. Her smile didn't falter, but something behind it shifted, like glass cracking under pressure. "Oh," she said softly, "well, I'm sure you'll reconsider. After all, community spirit is very important here." When she left, I knew it wasn't over. The air felt heavy, charged, like the calm before a storm. That night, I caught a glimpse of her through the blinds, standing at the end of my driveway under a streetlight, clipboard in hand. She was writing something down. I don't know how long she stood there, but by the time I stepped outside, she was gone. The next morning, I woke to find another envelope taped to my door. But this one wasn't from the HOA. It was from the Community of Concerned Neighbors. It read, "We believe in fairness. We believe in participation. We hope you will do the right thing." No signatures. No official letterhead. Just typed words on plain white paper. Something in me snapped then. Not anger, not yet, but the quiet certainty that I was being drawn into a game I hadn't agreed to play. A game I couldn't ignore any longer, because when people like Karen didn't get their way, they didn't stop. They escalated, and I could feel it. Something bigger was coming. The tension was no longer about rules or property lines. It was personal now. I didn't know it at the time, but that morning's letter was the first domino, the start of a chain reaction that would turn Crestwood Estates into a battleground, and the next move they made would drag me into a fight I never asked for, but one I was more than ready to finish. The letter was only the beginning. At first, I told myself to ignore it, to treat Karen's petty antics like background noise. But ignoring the HOA was like ignoring a leak in your ceiling. Sooner or later, it spreads. 2 days after that anonymous Community of Concerned Neighbors note, I came home from work to find a bright orange notice stapled to my front gate. "HOA enforcement action pending." The words hit like a punch. I tore it down and read through trembling disbelief. Multiple alleged violations, non-compliant vehicle display, unapproved exterior modifications, and failure to maintain harmonious curb appeal. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. My lawn was trimmed, my porch spotless. The so-called unapproved modification was just a hanging porch light I'd installed months ago. Nothing about it violated the bylaws. I knew the handbook front to back. I'd even helped enforce parts of it years ago, when the board still acted like a board instead of a dictatorship. But this was targeted. That night, I sat on my porch staring across the street at Karen's house. Her lights were on, curtains drawn, silhouettes moving inside. Probably the board meeting, probably my name being tossed around like a problem to be solved. I should have been used to conflict. After 20 years as police chief, I'd seen the ugliest parts of human nature. But this was different. This was war waged with smiles and signatures, the kind that stripped away your peace inch by inch until you didn't recognize your own home anymore. The next morning, I woke to find my trash bins dragged halfway across my driveway, lid open, garbage spilling onto the pavement. A sticky note fluttered from the side. "Trash collection violations will not be tolerated." Signed, HOA Trash Violations. That's when I realized it wasn't just Karen anymore. The board was getting bold, and the neighbors were getting involved. Later that day, I saw Melinda, the secretary, standing on her lawn, phone in hand, clearly recording me as I picked up the scattered trash. She gave me a sweet little wave. "Just documenting compliance," she called out, all sugar and venom. I bit down on the anger rising in my chest. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. The days bled into weeks, and every one of them brought something new. A $75 fine for improper vehicle storage. A $150 citation for lawn discoloration, even though it had rained nonstop for 3 days straight. Then another warning. Excessive noise after hours. I checked the timestamps. 8:15 p.m. I'd been running the vacuum. It became clear. They were building a record, twisting every ordinary thing into ammunition. One morning, I came home to find Dennis, the vice president, kneeling by my driveway with a tape measure. "Checking setbacks," he said flatly when I asked what he was doing. "For what?" "Possible code encroachment." "Your driveway looks," he extended. "It's been the same for 15 years, he smirked. "Well, rules evolve, Chief. Maybe you didn't keep up." That smirk. God, I wanted to wipe it off his face. But I didn't, because that's what they wanted. They wanted a reaction, something they could twist into hostility or non-cooperation. By midsummer, the fines totaled over $1,000. My mailbox looked like a war zone, stuffed with letters, notices, and passive-aggressive reminders. I tried to reason with them. I sent an email, calm, professional, precise. I asked for clarification, cited the bylaws, pointed out inconsistencies. 2 days later, I got a single-line reply. All actions are in accordance with HOA policy. Failure to comply may result in legal escalation. No signatures, no names. Just policy as a weapon. That's when I started documenting everything, photos, timestamps, interactions. Every note, every conversation, every strange occurrence, and there were plenty of those. The next phase was subtle. Gaslighting almost. Small disturbances that made me question whether I was being paranoid. The mailbox flag bent backward. My sprinkler heads twisted out of alignment. The Mustang's tire pressure mysteriously dropping overnight. Then came the real blow. One morning, I found a bright yellow sticker plastered on my car windshield. Immediate action required. Vehicle in violation. The HOA had decided the Mustang was non-operational. Non-operational. It was freshly detailed, engine spotless, tags up to date. But they didn't care. The sticker was a scarlet letter for the neighborhood to see. Within hours, I caught whispers, neighbors slowing their walks to stare, pretending to be curious but clearly reveling in the drama. And that's when I saw him, Karen's son, Brandon. He was leaning against his mother's SUV, smug and lazy, sipping an energy drink. I hadn't seen much of him before. He lived 2 towns over, apparently, but lately he'd been around more often. Too often. "Hey, Chief," he called out, smirking. "Nice car. Shame it's breaking the rules." "Funny," I said, voice low. "You know anything about that sticker?" He shrugged. "Mom runs a tight ship. Maybe you should just follow the rules like everyone else." Something about his tone. It wasn't mockery. It was ownership. Like he thought he was untouchable. I'd find out later just how deep his involvement ran. That weekend, the board announced a surprise community inspection. Every house, every yard, every inch of property to be reviewed for the collective good. They showed up in pairs, clipboards in hand, knocking on doors, snapping photos. When they reached mine, I stood on the porch, arms crossed. "Afternoon," Karen said sweetly. "We're just performing a standard inspection." "Without notice?" "Oh, we did send an email," she said, eyes gleaming. "Perhaps it went to your spam folder." I let them do their little tour. They noted paint wear on mailbox, minor oil residue in driveway, non-approved lighting fixture. But when Karen reached the garage, she froze. The Mustang gleamed under the fluorescent light, waxed to perfection. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Truly, but it's not compliant with Section 14C of our bylaws." I raised an eyebrow. "Section 14C doesn't exist," she smiled. "Oh, it does now. We had a board vote last night. Temporary emergency amendment. They had rewritten the rules overnight just to target me." That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying every interaction, every smirk, every new policy they conjured out of thin air. They weren't just trying to find me. They wanted me gone. The harassment grew bolder. HOA members began patrolling the street after sunset. Their flashlights flickered across my yard, their whispers carrying through the still air. A neighbor told me Karen claimed my car was lowering property values. Another said she'd hinted I was running some kind of illegal operation from my garage. The gossip spread like wildfire. People who used to wave now avoided eye contact. Kids stopped cutting through my yard on their bikes. Even the mailmen looked uneasy. It was psychological warfare. One night I heard a noise, a soft hiss near the garage. I grabbed a flashlight, stepped outside quietly, and froze. A shadow darted behind the hedges. When I reached the driveway, I saw it, a puddle spreading beneath the Mustang. Someone had slashed the tire. I called the police, but they couldn't do much. No cameras, no witnesses, they said. But I knew. I knew who it was. The next morning, I marched straight to Karen's door. Brandon answered, smirking like the devil himself. "Morning, Chief," he said. "Where's your mother?" "She's busy." "Tell her she's gone too far." He stepped closer, breath hot with arrogance. "You don't scare anyone anymore. Maybe it's time you learned how it feels to be on the other side of the badge." I clenched my fists. But I walked away. Because that's what they wanted, a confrontation, proof of aggression. Still, something inside me cracked that day. By the next week, my property had become the neighborhood's battleground. Anonymous complaints poured in, unsightly garage clutter, overuse of water, visible tool equipment. They even accused me of violating noise ordinances when I wasn't home. Each complaint came with another fine, another warning, another letter. The total had reached nearly $5,000. I filed an appeal. The board reviewed it and unanimously rejected it, without explanation. That's when I started digging. I spent hours reviewing HOA meeting minutes, past records, financial statements. What I found made my blood run cold. The board had been approving community improvement fees for years, small charges hidden in residents' dues. But the money didn't match the projects listed. Landscaping upgrades that never happened, repairs that were never done, thousands unaccounted for, and every signature authorizing the expenses? Karen's. That was the real reason she wanted me gone. She knew I'd eventually find it. The next HOA meeting, I showed up uninvited. The room went silent as I walked in. Karen was mid-sentence but froze, smile flickering. "Chief," she said tightly, "this is a closed session." "Then close it after I'm done." I set a stack of papers on the table. "You've been embezzling community funds." And I have the proof. Her eyes didn't even flicker. That scared me more than if she'd shouted. "Accusations are serious," she said smoothly. "You wouldn't want to embarrass yourself." "Then explain the missing $20,000. The room buzzed with murmurs. Frank turned pale. Melinda started whispering to Dennis. Karen just smiled. "We'll be happy to review your concerns after your fines are paid in full. Otherwise, you're not in good standing with the HOA, and as such, you have no voice here." The trap snapped shut. Legally, she was right. HOA bylaws were airtight. I was a resident out of compliance. That stripped me of the right to vote, to attend meetings, even to access records. They'd boxed me in perfectly. After that night, the harassment turned malicious. My mail went missing. My sprinklers malfunctioned again, flooding my lawn. The city received an anonymous complaint about hazardous materials stored in my garage, forcing a surprise inspection. It was humiliation by 1,000 cuts. Even my friends started backing away. "Maybe just sell and move," one told me. "It's not worth the fight," but it was. It was my home, my father's house, my car, my peace, and I wasn't going to let a self-appointed tyrant take that away. So I gathered everything, photos, emails, recorded calls, proof of tampered mail, even screenshots of Karen's public posts hinting at troublesome residents. The final straw came 2 nights later. I was out late, watching from the porch when I saw movement near the driveway. A car door slammed. Brandon again. He was stumbling, drunk, laughing with 2 friends. One held a can of spray paint. Before I could move, they started tagging my garage door. Big black letters, "Rat." I charged down the steps shouting. They scattered, except Brandon, who tripped over the curb and hit the pavement hard. When he looked up, fury twisted his face. "You think you're the hero here?" He spat. "You're done." Mom's making sure of it. He limped off into the night, leaving behind a streak of paint and the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The next morning, Karen was at my door with 2 police officers. "There's been a report of assault," she said coolly. "Against my son." It was perfect. She'd flipped the script. The officers were polite, but the implication was clear. They'd received a statement, witnesses, even a short video clip. Grainy, but edited to look like I'd shoved him. For the first time I felt real fear. Not for my safety, but for my reputation. Everything I'd built, every ounce of integrity, I could feel it slipping through my fingers. After they left, I sat alone in that silent house, surrounded by papers, fines, and threats. My phone buzzed. Another HOA email. Immediate lien authorization pending. Pay balance or forfeit property rights. They were coming for the house. That's when I realized this wasn't harassment anymore. It was eradication. They wanted me erased, but I wasn't done. That night, I installed cameras, hidden ones. Every corner of the yard, every entry point. If they wanted war, I'd give them one. But not with fists or threats. With proof. And it didn't take long. 2 nights later, 2:43 a.m., motion alert. I checked the feed, Karen, clipboard in hand, standing at my driveway. She bent down, scribbled something on a note, and taped it to my windshield. Then she took photos, lots of them, of my car, of my porch, of the interior through the window. Then she looked straight at the camera, like she knew it was there, and smiled. When I went outside minutes later, she was gone. The note was still there. It read, "Final warning. The community will not tolerate defiance. You should leave before things get worse." For a long moment, I just stood there, note trembling in my hand, moonlight catching the ink. I'd reached the breaking point. This wasn't about cars or lawns or bylaws anymore. It was about control, one person's obsession with absolute power, and what happens when someone refuses to bow. And as I looked across the street at her darkened windows, I made a promise to myself. She'd wanted to make an example out of me, but when the truth came out, it wouldn't be me they remembered, it would be her. By the time the sun rose that morning, the air in the neighborhood felt different, thicker somehow, charged as if the whole street knew something was about to break. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the entire night replaying that footage over and over. Karen, standing in my driveway at 2:43 in the morning, taping that final threat to my windshield like a conqueror, marking her victory. I knew what she wanted, to push me into submission, to make me pack up and vanish quietly. But she underestimated me. She thought the man who once ran this town's police department would crumble under her paper bullets and fake smiles. What she didn't know was that I had everything. Every lie, every fabricated violation, every shred of proof she'd buried under HOA procedure. My cameras had caught more than her late-night visits. They'd caught her cronies, too. Dennis, the vice president, tampering with my irrigation system. Melinda stuffing envelopes labeled with fake signatures. Brandon spray-painting my garage while laughing about teaching the old man a lesson. And I had the one thing she couldn't manipulate, time-stamped. Crystal-clear video evidence. Still, I didn't go to the police right away, not yet. Because I wanted them all in one place, every last one of them. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night, 7 p.m., in the community hall. I knew what I was walking into. I knew Karen would twist, spin, and claw her way out of any accusation if given the chance. So I planned to make sure there would be no chance. That morning, I called a local reporter I knew from my years in uniform, a woman named Sarah Ellis. She'd covered enough local corruption cases to smell a good story when it was close. When I told her what I had, she didn't hesitate. "Record everything," she said. "I'll be there." I could hear the edge of anticipation in her voice. By the time evening rolled around, I felt like I was walking into battle. My nerves buzzed, my hands steady but my chest tight. I slipped a small USB drive into my pocket, the copy of every incriminating file, and left my house just as the streetlights blinked on. The community hall was already full when I arrived. I saw them at the front of the room, Karen in her usual power stance, blazer pressed, hair pinned to perfection, lips curved in that politician's smile. To her left sat Dennis, pretending to review papers. Melinda was whispering behind her clipboard, and Brandon, sitting smugly near the back, grinning at me as I walked in. Every seat was filled, neighbors I'd known for years, some looking curious, others wary. A few avoided my eyes altogether. Karen had painted me as the villain for so long that some had started to believe it. "Chief," she said, her tone syrupy sweet, "here to pay your dues?" "No," I said evenly. "Here to settle something far overdue?" A few people shifted uncomfortably. The tension rippled across the room like a current. Karen cleared her throat. "Let's begin with community business, shall we?" I didn't let her continue. "Actually, I think the community deserves to see what's really been going on first." Her eyes flashed. A flicker of panic she tried to bury. Beneath that icy calm, "You're not on the agenda tonight." Neither were the late-night inspections. "Or the fines you invented, or the harassment that's been eating away at this neighborhood for months." "Mr. Callahan," Dennis interrupted, "if you continue this disruption, we'll have to ask you to leave." "Go ahead," I said, voice low but sharp. "But before you do, maybe everyone should see this." I pulled out a small remote and connected it to the projector at the back of the hall. The screen flickered to life, and for a long moment, the room went dead silent, just the low hum of the speakers as the first clip rolled. There she was, Karen, under the pale beam of a streetlight, standing in my driveway at 2 a.m. Her face, her clipboard, her pen scratching notes, her hand pressing that letter to my windshield. Gasps echoed around the room. Someone whispered, "Is that?" Karen tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come now. That's taken out of context." I clicked the remote again. The next clip began. Dennis crouched by my sprinkler system with a wrench. Then Melinda, sliding forged complaint letters into mail slots. Then Brandon, drunk, laughing, spray painting the word "rat" across my garage. Karen's mask cracked. This is illegal surveillance. You had no right." The murmurs turned into a roar. People stood from their seats, whispering to each other, glancing between Karen and me. Years of pent-up frustration were surfacing in real time. Neighbors who'd quietly swallowed their own unfair fines, their own anonymous complaints. Now realizing they weren't alone, Dennis leaned toward Karen, hissing something under his breath. She raised her chin, trying to recover control. "Everyone, please. This is clearly a personal vendetta from a man who refuses to follow community standards." I cut her off again. "Standards? Like the $20,000 you siphoned from the HOA's maintenance fund? Or the fake signatures you used to approve your so-called beautification projects?" Her face drained of color. That's when I saw it, the crack in her armor. "You don't have proof," she whispered. I clicked the remote again. The final video rolled, a recording of her, taken from a phone conversation I'd had transcribed and preserved, where she bragged about allocating funds from unused HOA reserves for personal reimbursements. Her own voice filled the hall. "I've earned that money," she said on the recording, dripping arrogance. "Do you know how much time I put into keeping this place in line?" "They should be thanking me," the hall erupted. Shouts, disbelief, anger. The board members sat frozen, faces pale. Karen's eyes darted wildly, searching for some way out. But there was none left. That's when Sarah walked in, the reporter, with a camera crew in tow. I hadn't told her exactly when to show up. I just said, "Be there when it happens." She took one look at the chaos and started filming. Karen turned on me like a cornered animal. "You set me up," she hissed. "No," I said. "You did that all on your own." Her voice broke into a shriek. "You think this will ruin me? You think you can humiliate me?" She grabbed the stack of papers in front of her and hurled them across the table. "You have no idea what I've done for this neighborhood." Dennis stood up, backing away. "Karen, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Dennis," she snapped. "You were part of this, too." The room was spinning out of her control. Years of manipulation were crumbling right before everyone's eyes. Sarah stepped closer, her camera steady. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you have any comment about the embezzlement allegations?" Karen turned, stunned by the flash of light. "Allegations? You can't prove—" Then her words caught in her throat. 2 police officers had entered the hall, one of them an old colleague of mine. "Karen Whitmore," he said, "we need you to come with us." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The audience had fallen completely silent now, just the echo of footsteps and the metallic click of handcuffs. Dennis muttered something about just following orders. Melinda burst into tears. Brandon stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the glass. And me? I just stood there, still as stone, watching the woman who'd tried to destroy me finally realize her empire had collapsed. She turned to me one last time as the officers led her away. "You'll regret this," she spat. "They'll turn on you next." They always do, but the look in her eyes wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. As the door closed behind her, the room exhaled all at once. Neighbors talking, shouting, demanding answers. Years of submission had turned to outrage. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. Sarah had everything she needed. The footage, the financials, the recordings. It was all going public by morning, and as I stepped outside into the cool night air, for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. But it wasn't over yet. Not quite. The fallout was instant. The next day, Karen's arrest was front-page news. HOA president accused of fraud, harassment, and misuse of community funds. Her mugshot spread through every local feed, every social media page. The same people who once worshipped her now posted angry comments demanding the entire board resign. By evening, Dennis had stepped down. Melinda followed. Brandon deleted every trace of his smug online presence. And the best part, the city attorney announced a full audit of the HOA's financial records, citing my evidence as the trigger. Neighbors who once avoided me began stopping by, apologizing, thanking me. Some admitted they'd been fined unfairly too, but had been too afraid to fight back. Others offered to help repair the damage, painting the garage, replanting the trampled grass, restoring what Karen had tried to destroy. But what stayed with me most was one conversation, a woman from 3 houses down. She was quiet, shy. She came to my porch that night, hands clasped. "I saw everything," she said softly. "All these years she made us think we couldn't say no. You reminded us we could." Her words hit harder than any headline. Still, the moment that truly ended, it came a few days later, when I got a letter, not from the HOA, but from the court. The lien against my house was nullified. All fines were officially revoked. The HOA's authority was suspended pending investigation. Karen's control was over, completely. I stood in my driveway, staring at that letter under the sunlight, the same driveway she'd once stalked like her personal kingdom. The same spot where she'd taped her threats, her notices, her warnings, and now it was mine again, quiet, clean, free, but victory never feels the way you think it will. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about breathing again, about reclaiming something deeper than property or pride. It was about taking back peace. Later that week, Sarah called. "The story's blowing up," she said. "People are furious. Dozens of residents from other neighborhoods are coming forward. You started something bigger than you know." I looked out at the sunset bleeding across the cul-de-sac, kids laughing again, neighbors talking freely for the first time in months. "Good," I said. "It's about time someone stood up to them," she laughed softly. "You realize, right, you're kind of the neighborhood legend now?" I smiled. "A legend's just a story that survived the truth." As the evening settled in, I sat on my porch, the same spot where this all began. The soft hum of sprinklers replaced the sound of arguments. The air smelled like jasmine and wet grass, and across the street, Karen's house sat empty, her blinds drawn, her once perfect lawn overgrown, her mailbox stuffed with unanswered mail. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I just felt stillness, because in the end, this wasn't just about an HOA. It was about what happens when power goes unchecked, when good people stay silent too long. So maybe this story isn't just mine. Maybe it's every homeowner who's ever been bullied by a board, every person who's been told to follow the rules, when the rules were written to control them. And maybe that's the real victory, reminding people that their home is theirs, not a battlefield, not a playground for petty tyrants, theirs. So I'll ask you this. If the place you loved, the one you built your life around, was suddenly used against you, how far would you go to take it back? It's strange how quiet the neighborhood became after everything fell apart. For weeks, the cul-de-sac that had once been alive with gossip, fines, and fake smiles turned into something else, something raw and real. People didn't wave as much anymore, at least not at first. They were cautious, uncertain, like waking from a long sleep and realizing the dream had been a nightmare all along. Karen's house stood empty. Her perfect white shutters stayed closed. Her lawn, once the symbol of her self-righteous control, was now wild and untrimmed. The grass crept over her perfect walkway, the paint on her front door started to peel, and her grand HOA president sign had been removed by court order. What used to be her throne was now just another house, silent, still, and forgotten. Her name was on everyone's lips, but not in admiration anymore. Every neighbor had their story, the fines they'd paid, the letters they'd received, the humiliation she'd inflicted. People compared notes, realizing just how deep her manipulation had gone. The lies weren't limited to me. She'd fabricated citations for kids' toys on lawns, unauthorized paint shades, and even for people's cars being too old for community standards. She had ruled through fear, and for the first time, everyone could finally say it out loud. The first HOA meeting after her arrest was nothing like the others. No clipboards, no smug smiles, no power games, just people sitting in a circle in that same community hall, staring at the empty chair where Karen used to preside. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Dennis was there too, wearing a cheap suit that suddenly looked too big for him. His hands shook when he spoke, claiming he didn't know the full extent of Karen's actions. Nobody believed him. Not anymore. Melinda cried through most of it, saying she just followed instructions and that she never meant to hurt anyone. But the damage was done. The trust was gone. The community had voted unanimously by secret ballot to dissolve the HOA entirely. The vote passed without a single dissenting hand. The HOA charter, which had once been used as a weapon, was now nothing more than a burned piece of paper in the trash. Watching it all unfold felt surreal. For so long I'd been the target, the scapegoat, the troublemaker, the one who didn't respect the rules. And now people were thanking me, shaking my hand, saying things like, "You did what we were too afraid to do." It was humbling in a way I didn't expect. But victory isn't always clean. The investigation into the HOA's finances uncovered things even I hadn't imagined. Karen had embezzled nearly $50,000 over 5 years, channeling funds into a consulting company she created under her maiden name. She'd used HOA funds to pay for her vacations, her designer wardrobe, even her son's car. Dennis and Melinda weren't innocent either. They'd approved expenses in exchange for discounted property assessments, which meant they paid less in dues while everyone else paid more. It was a whole web of corruption, woven carefully behind the language of community improvement. When the sentencing came, I didn't go to the courthouse. I'd already seen enough of her lies. But Sarah, the reporter, sent me a clip anyway. Karen stood there, thinner now, her hair unstyled, her confidence gone. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. "You used your authority to exploit your neighbors. You betrayed the trust of an entire community." She got 5 years. Not a slap on the wrist, not probation, real time. Dennis got 2 years, Melinda 1. It was justice, slow but absolute. The day after the sentencing, I woke to a knock on my door. It was Sarah again, holding a coffee and her notepad. "People love your story," she said with a small smile. "It's gone viral, millions of views. Other neighborhoods are sharing their own HOA horror stories." I laughed quietly. Guess I struck a nerve. "You did more than that," she said. "You started something." Her words stayed with me. For months, emails poured in. People from all over the country sending their own videos, their own proof of HOA corruption, harassment, and intimidation. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It had become a movement. But back here, in my own little corner of the world, things began to change in smaller, quieter ways. The kids were back to playing basketball in the street, their laughter echoing against the cul-de-sac. The older couple, 2 doors down, planted sunflowers without worrying about getting a violation notice. People started painting their houses however they liked. No approval forms, no threats, just color and individuality blooming where uniformity once ruled. Even the community's tone shifted. Where once people avoided each other, now they talked, really talked. We'd been through hell together, and somehow that shared pain built something stronger than any policy ever could. As for me, I rebuilt what they'd tried to destroy. I repainted the garage door, repaired the sprinklers, replanted the lawn. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Every stroke of paint, every blade of grass felt like reclaiming something stolen. One afternoon, as I was fixing the mailbox, yes, the same one Karen had marked as non-compliant, a familiar car slowed to a stop in front of my driveway. It was Brandon, her son. He rolled down the window, eyes downcast. He looked older, worn down. "Hey," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." For a moment I didn't say anything. He looked genuinely broken, far from the arrogant kid who once kicked me out of my own pool. He continued, "I didn't know what she was doing, not really. I thought she was just helping people." "Guess I was wrong." I nodded slowly. "You were young. You believed what she told you." He nodded back, gripping the steering wheel. "She's not doing well in there. I don't think she ever thought she'd get caught." There was silence, only the sound of the wind moving through the trees. "I hope," I said finally, "that when she gets out, she learns what community actually means." He gave a faint, sad smile, then drove off. After that, life settled into something normal again, something I hadn't felt in years. Peaceful mornings, friendly neighbors, no more letters taped to the windshield. Sarah's article eventually won an award for investigative reporting. She called to tell me, joking, "You're officially the face of HOA reform." I told her, "Let's hope there's no sequel." But there was one more twist I didn't see coming. 6 months after the trial, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Not from a lawyer, not from the city, but from the new HOA Reform Board. It was a national organization forming after stories like mine went viral. They wanted to use my case as a framework for new legislation, laws to limit HOA power, prevent financial abuse, and create oversight committees for homeowners. I just stared at the letter for a long time. The same system that tried to crush me was now being rewritten because of me. I signed the release form that day, not for recognition, not for revenge, but for something simpler. Closure, and yet, closure doesn't mean erasing the scars. There are still nights I walk down the street and remember the tension, the paranoia, the way I used to flinch every time I saw a white envelope in the mailbox, the way my heart would pound whenever I saw Karen's car turn the corner. Those feelings don't disappear overnight, but they fade, slowly, quietly, like a wound finally healing under sunlight. Sometimes I see the neighbors gathering on the old HOA lawn for block parties. No rules, no board approvals, just music and laughter. I stand at my fence, coffee in hand, and watch. And it hits me. This is what a neighborhood should be. Not control, not intimidation, connection. Maybe that's what Karen never understood. A neighborhood isn't meant to be ruled. It's meant to be lived in. Months later, the community voted to replace the HOA entirely with a simple voluntary council of residents. No fines, no presidents, no politics, just people helping each other maintain what they all share. I never ran for it. I didn't need to. I'd already fought my war. But sometimes they still come to me for advice. And when they do, I just tell them the same thing. If you're doing something out of fear, it's not community. It's control. They usually nod, thoughtful. Some smile, and that's enough. The story didn't end with Karen's downfall. It ended with the neighborhood's rebirth. Even now, every so often, I'll catch myself glancing toward her empty house. The bank finally took it over, but no one's moved in. The curtains still hang, untouched, faded from the sun. It's strange how a place can hold the echo of a person even after they're gone. Sometimes when the wind blows just right, I can almost hear her, the clipped heels on the pavement, the sharp voice barking about rules and standards. But then it's gone, carried away by the same breeze that moves through the new gardens, the new laughter. There's poetry in that, I think. Because the thing about tyrants, whether they run nations or neighborhoods, is that they never think their reign will end. But it always does. Power built on fear always crumbles. In the end, all that's left is the truth. And truth has a way of reclaiming its place, no matter how deep you try to bury it. The neighborhood is alive again. Kids' bikes on lawns, holiday. Lights and colors she'd have hated, people laughing too loud, grilling past curfew, living, really living. And as for me, I've stopped waiting for the next letter, the next notice, the next fight. Because there won't be one, not anymore. The house feels lighter, the air feels freer. Sometimes I'll stand on my porch at sunset, the same porch where all of this began, and let the quiet wrap around me. The orange glow paints everything in warmth, the sound of sprinklers clicking somewhere down the block, and I'll think about how fragile peace can be and how fiercely it's worth protecting once you've fought for it. We tend to think of home as just a place. Walls, a roof, a mortgage. But it's more than that. It's where your dignity lives, where your peace breathes, where you shouldn't have to fight just to exist. And maybe that's what this whole story has been about all along. Not revenge, not pride, but the simple, stubborn right to feel safe in your own space. So now, when people ask what happened to Karen, I just smile and say, she learned what happens when you mess with the wrong neighbor. But deep down, I know it's more than that. She wasn't just one woman with too much control. She was a symbol of every system that forgets who it's meant to serve. And I guess that's why people keep watching this story. Because it's not just mine, it's theirs too. So if you ever find yourself standing on your front porch holding a notice that doesn't feel fair, wondering if you're crazy for fighting back, don't. Because sometimes doing what's right means standing alone for a while. But if you do, you might just wake up one day and realize you didn't just save your home, you saved your community, and maybe even something bigger. Because power doesn't fall on its own. Someone has to stand up and push it, and when they do, well, what happens next? That's how legends are born.